my entire life changed. I would have never gone if I knew what it was, because before I went, I was like, therapy? I don't need therapy. I'm fine. You know.
You were one of those.
Oh, I was one of those. I was like,
no.
Therapy's for other people. Look how good I'm doing.
God, the people that scream therapy's for other people.
It is for you, babe.
Mm-hmm.
It's for you directly, actually. If you resist it that much, then you need it.
You're holding up a big red flag and you're the only one that can't see it.
Yeah, take it from me. Go to therapy, please.
Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. I'm Patrick Custer, your host, and so excited to be here today with the one and only Lou Ridley.
Hey.
When I sat back and I thought, how do I describe Lou?
Oh, gosh.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
I said that to myself. So I thought, I think what I want to start off with is talking about the first time I saw you. So it was at the red carpet at the Healing in the Margins benefit. And I swear to God, I looked up and I said, oh my God, Lady Gaga's here. And I know you're laughing because that's not the first time you've heard that.
Yeah, no.
And clearly I was wrong, but I couldn't have been more happy to have been wrong because of the person that I've gotten to know since then, and the story that we get to talk about today. So there's so much more than just your music. This plant is bigger than the normal one that's
Lots of
here.
essence.
And so my space is, but yes, so your story is so broad and so all encompassing. I'm really excited to dive into it. But one of the things that I think that many people, your followers, know you for is your beautiful music and voice.
Thank you.
You're a beloved now Nashvilleian, but come from a couple other cities as well. And I always like to start at the beginning with an introduction with my guest. If for somebody who doesn't know you, how would you introduce the beginning of your story?
From the canal, or like from memory? Which part?
And in walks your sense of humor. So this is really...
You tell me.
That's perfect. No, exactly. So literally, I would say if you're describing your story, like where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Texas. Grew up in like a city outside of Dallas.
What city?
Keller is where we had the ranch, and then we moved to Southlake,
Lovely.
Texas, which is a place where people live. Not proud of being from there, but yeah.
What was life like growing up there?
Keller was adorable. I was climbing trees and catching crawdads and riding my horse. And then when we moved to Southlake, I had a really tough time. In hindsight, I know why I had a tough time, but at the time I was like, okay, am I just not cool? Because I just got picked on a lot and didn't really fit in. And even though we did well for ourselves as a family, my dad was never the let's go to the Gucci store guy. So even when we were doing fine, I just couldn't keep up with the girls at school, nor did I want to. It just, something about that place kind of felt odd. And then as I got older...
Was it a very wealthy area?
It's a very wealthy area, and it's a very bigoted area. The MSNBC did like a 3-part podcast on Southlake because they're banning like every book that has anything to do with history outside of white history. And it's a very, like, as far as I know, they can't build apartments in the city of Southlake because they don't want renters in the city.
Oh.
So it's like LA for ignorance, like a lot of money, a lot of flash, but a lot of bigotry, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That feels a little similar to the town I grew up in.
Really? I don't know where you grew up, actually.
Oh, should I name Brentwood?
Well, wouldn't you know about it? My experience of Brentwood is not far from that. So that's interesting.
I mean, I won't say everything was bad, but yeah, I can relate to some of the things that you just mentioned. So
yeah. It was weird. It was a weird place. There were nice people. There's nice people everywhere, but definitely embarrassed to have been there and maybe not known at the time some of the ideals I was subscribing to without realizing. And then as I got older, I was like, wait, this is not right at all. And I had to kind of unlearn certain things.
Isn't that the truth as we go through life? And
like religion.
Find our own path. That's for sure.
Find our own path.
So, the big tenets of what our conversations on this show are centered on, a recovery of the soul, the body, the mind, in various forms. And your story, I think, is so unique because you've been through quite a lot in your years, in your short time here on earth.
I'm only 21, but...
I know. And don't even look it.
Thank you.
But, I want to start where I always like to let the guests lead, but I want to lead up to where your first significant trauma began. We've talked about this before, but let's kind of lay the groundwork leading up to that for those essential pieces.
Sure. So I didn't fit in high school, and I thought something was wrong with me. And I started hanging out with older people from other cities, surrounding cities, who were getting into trouble and doing whatever. And as far as my memory serves me, which 50% of our memories are fuzzy or they change as we get older. But I was not a sexually active young person. That just wasn't my thing. It's not because there's anything wrong with it. Boys didn't like me anyway. So I started hanging out with these older guys, and they one night decided that they wanted to, sleep with the hot virgin. So they drugged me, and they were I think 22 or 23 at the time. And they drugged me. And I have this distinct memory of them taking photos of me. But obviously, since I was a minor, nothing ever happened with those, thank God. And then one of them decided to take my virginity, and I guess some of the others watched. And then after that happened, they walked me around the party naked to show everyone what they had done. I have no memory of this. It's gone because of what they put in my drink, but I had people afterward tell me what had happened. So then I I spiraled because I had no toolkit to deal with that. And I wanted to be a virgin until, I'd found my person. That was one thing from my religious upbringing that I actually was into. It was I don't want to share myself prematurely. And I hadn't until then. And then that sent me.
How old were you?
I think I was 16 and a half to 17.
Did you tell your parents?
No.
Did you tell any authority figures?
I came home and I told my mom and my dad that I had liked this guy and that I let him do it, and we consensually did it. And my dad was livid. When they took me to my OB-GYN, I told my OB-GYN, and he was like, and he delivered my little brother, and he was like, you have to tell your parents. And I was like, I can't, because that was before Me Too. And that was before that, that was before people who experience sexual trauma don't just internalize it. This was I was like, this is my fault. What was I wearing? What was I doing? Because that's how we get treated, especially as women, is well, what did you do to elicit this behavior out of them? And so I was fearful that because we grew up in a religious house and things like that, that if I told my dad, he would either blame me for it or he would murder the person that did it. And I felt like either thing was too stressful.
Yeah.
So because, my dad had a temper. So I was like, okay, he's either going to flip out on me or flip out on somebody else. And I was scared. I wanted them to like me, because a lot of times when you go through trauma, you like to go back and repeat it because it's familiar. Your brain, I don't know. I mean, I know how many sexual assault survivors go back to the person that did it over and over. It takes so long to exit the situation. So it's sort of this thing where I was like, I'm not going to tell them and I'll be fine. And then I went back and kept hanging out with him, and it kept happening. And then I think finally I just was like, I stopped hanging out with him.
Well, I think that something that is interesting to me when we've talked about this before is, yes, many sexual assault survivors, I think that we're familiar with the scenario of spouses or partners that go back into the situation because life is like structured or already set up in a way where they feel like they can't escape. But that there's also this dynamic that you and I talked about, which I think is the one, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the more applicable to your scenario, which is the draw for the victim to continue to put themselves into the situation, whether it's the same person, people, or just similar environments. Why do you think, did you have any knowing that what was your level of perception around the behavior that was taking place at the time? Autopilot, did you know it was?
Autopilot. I had no idea. And this again was over a decade ago. So my brain was like, you brought this on yourself. And so just chill. Don't be weird. Don't be embarrassing. Like, don't make a big deal out of it. And obviously, as we spoke about before, I just continued to end up in situations with men through the duration of my freshman year of college that repeated that trauma because it felt familiar. And at the time, I did not know what I was doing. I had no other type of sexual experience. So I was like, maybe this is just how it is. I had a boyfriend for a little bit after that happened at the end of high school, but that was toxic as well. And so I was like, maybe this is what you do as a woman. Maybe you're supposed to be in situations where you're not enjoying yourself and you can't remember half of it. And, other girls were doing the same thing. And we all just kind of thought it was normal for people to put us in these situations. It was almost like, it just became familiar, and I didn't know there was anything else. I didn't go to therapy.
Right.
So, and I didn't tell anybody. So there wasn't anybody older and wiser to be like, hey, that's not how it needs to be. I just was like, okay, here I am.
Clearly there are consequences emotionally and mentally to being victimized in those types of situations and what have you. And that builds on itself. I mean, you're still developing during those years. And I'm curious what consequences began to emerge for you that were any sort of a wake-up call or something that other people started to notice in your behavior. What was the shift that took place to make any change for you?
I think what ended up happening was I couldn't keep any friends, especially female friends. And I've always been wired. I'm a girl's girl. And I was doing things that aren't girl behavior. And it's because I was being self-destructive, but we're all teenagers. We don't, so I had trouble keeping girlfriends. And I remember all the girls I moved in with hated me. And looking back, I get it. But at the time I was like, something's wrong here. I don't feel okay. And I remember I went to the school psychologist and she was like, oh, you have manic depression, you have anxiety disorder, you have all these things. And she wanted to put me on all these pills. And I was like, why would I just randomly start having all this stuff? And I just one day woke up after I did Ambien one night and tripped out. And I woke up and I was like, I'm going to die if I don't do something else. And I called my mom and I just was like, I'm not happy. I have to switch schools. And I did. And then, slowly got on the right path when I went to a new school.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a significant event as far as I can remember. It was more so just a buildup of things where I was like, this can't be all that life has to offer. I'm fucking miserable. And I feel used and I feel gross about myself and girls don't like me and something's wrong.
Yeah.
And that was what was wrong.
When you changed schools and got out of that situation, what did you start to notice about how your relationship dynamics changed, and even with your relationship with yourself?
I think when I first left, some of the learned behaviors still existed, and it took me a second. And there were definitely times when I got to my new school that I look back now and I'm like, you were still in it, but not to the degree that I was at the first school. And then as I started to develop, I started to make friendships, and I started to meet, as we got older, I started to meet other girls who were putting themselves in harm's way as well. And I started to see myself in them, and I was like, okay. And I started to realize that I could use what I had experienced to help them and influence them, because I was coming to the other side of it. So my friendships, especially with women, started to develop at that point, because I was like, oh, no, I've been here. Let me tell you how this ends so that I can save you some of the trouble. And I didn't do it right every time, but that's kind of where it started. And that's around the time that I found music as well. So I think once I figured out that I was good at something other than letting men use me, I didn't want to let men use me as much. So then that changed my friendships, obviously.
Yeah. Like a beautiful moment that those two things kind of happened at the same juncture. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about how you found music, because I feel like so many of the people we hear in Nashville, they're like, well, ever since I was 2 sitting in my uncle's lap, they put a banjo in my, whatever. And that wasn't your story.
No.
Mom and dad weren't singing. Mm-mm. You weren't doing church choir growing up.
Mm-mm. I was in choir, I think, in like 7th grade.
Oh, you were?
I wasn't even good at it. That was like in and out 1 year.
Okay.
I didn't know if I could sing until I got to college. Actually, the first college, my roommates, one set of roommates that I had, they were like, we always hear you humming. Why don't you actually sing? I want to hear if you're good. And I sang, and they were like, oh, you're good. And I said, oh, okay, well, cool. And I had always loved music, and I had gotten a guitar when I was younger, but it was not a thing that you pursue in my house. So like I would sing when no one was home, but I just didn't know if I was good. And so I think having that confirmation from my friends at the time, I was like, okay, I could really do this. And then I slowly just started to find my way with it all after college.
Love it.
Yeah.
And you found your way to Nashville, Tennessee.
I did, thanks to Christian Barker, my attorney.
Love it.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew it was your attorney that got you here.
It's my attorney. He found me on Twitter during quarantine, and he was like, why are you not in Nashville? You're making country music. And I was like, I don't know, because I thought LA was the land of dreams. That's what I was sold. So he told me to come out here, and he set me up with a bunch of rights, and it went really well. And a month later, me and my best friend Bethany just were like, fuck it, let's just move to Nashville.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is a wonderful place to be right now.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Other than politically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was just doing some advocacy work yesterday on Capitol Hill, and that was quite the experience, I'll say.
Yeah.
Chills.
Yeah.
Golly. So what would you say has made the biggest change for you when we talk about shifts in, because we talked about this before, but there was a time where you got introduced to some breakthroughs emotionally that really changed things for you. And you went through like was it a therapeutic program? It
was like a 3-week course that essentially is how they like describe it as basically like 30 years of therapy in 3 weeks. And it was exactly that. But I didn't mean to go there.
Yeah.
I would have never gone if I knew what it was, because before I went, I was like, therapy? I don't need therapy. I'm fine.
You were one of those.
Oh, I was one of those. I was like, therapy's for other people. Look how good I'm doing.
You know what's funny is that I think therapy's for everyone, but God, the people that scream therapy's for other people.
It is for you, babe. It's for you directly, actually. If you
Yeah.
resist it that much, then you need it.
You're holding up a big red flag and you're the only one that can't see it.
Yeah, take it from me. Go to therapy, please.
So what was that experience like for you, and how did life change going forward?
So when I was about 23, I got into a relationship, and we were both young. And right at the beginning of that relationship, my grandmother, and then my father, and then my grandfather, and then my uncle all died in a short amount of time. And obviously he was young and not equipped. So I was in a place where I didn't feel like I had anybody. And I was working dead-end jobs in LA, and he had moved out to LA as well because he was a clothing designer. So we lived there together, and the relationship was not going well because how could it? And I was taking temp jobs in LA because I had moved out there with my mom initially, because after my dad died, my mom was like, fuck it, let's go to LA. And we went there thinking, well, you just walk down the street and people stop you and then you're a big singer star. You know what I mean? And that obviously was not the case. So I'm in LA, I'm working at a dog food store, I'm taking temp jobs, and I take this temp job that's an hour and a half away from where I live, leasing apartments. And I'm in this miserable relationship, no offense. And this woman comes in to lease an apartment, and she's like, you should not be working here. And I said, I know. And so she gets me, she's like, I'm going to hire you at my company. They did like video game, something. And I was like, anything's better than working at this temp job, because it was a weird environment. So then she comes back, she's like, well, I can't hire you, but my best friends can. And I'm like, I didn't even ask to be hired by your best friends, but okay. So I get this job, and it's for an interior design company, and they do hotels. And they're like, hey, just so you know, when you start work here, we support you by trying to send you to this thing. And you don't have to do it, but we did it 10, 12 years ago. That's how we met. And we love our employees to go if they feel comfortable going. And I'm like, well, I want them to like me, so I'm going to go. Nobody tells me anything about it. Okay. And I show up to this like little seminar thing, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? But I want them to like me.
Yeah.
So I go. And at first I'm there, and I'm like, and then I start doing the work, and everything my entire life changed. The trajectory of my life changed. I got out of the relationship I was in. I finally got the balls to leave it, because when you have that much trauma with someone, you become bonded in a way that's not always healthy. And so it's like neither of us wanted to be in it, but we couldn't leave, right? So I left that relationship, and thank God for that, because it was holding me back, and him as well, I'm sure. And then I really started to fall back in love with music, because there were a few years in LA where I was struggling so bad that I didn't even do music. I was just like, I moved there with a dream and some promise from some people, and it wasn't happening. And I got so caught up in temp jobs and all these things and the LA traffic that I had no time for music. And my boyfriend didn't believe in me, because, so it was just, there wasn't anywhere for me to thrive. So I didn't. And then after that period in that therapy thing, I was like, oh no, this is what I'm meant to do. And so I, at the time, I was renting a house from my boss. And I had my friend come over and help build a studio in the house. And then I had our other friend come over and teach me how to use Logic so that I could make my own music. And that's where I made
You did your own editing and production?
Yes, I had help. I had Kyle Ross and Keith Askey. Kyle Ross is one of my best friends, and he's who built the studio in my house, and he mixes and masters, and he's perfect. And then Keith Askey, who's a wonderful human being. And I had told Kyle, if I get back into music, I don't want to be around creepy guys, because when I moved to LA and I started getting in rooms with these powerful people, all they're ever trying to do is have sex with you or take your power away. Like, it's so rare that they actually even want to do business. So I fell out of love with it. And I was like, Kyle, I need somebody who's not going to be weird to me. And he goes, I have the perfect person. And Keith is happily married. They have a baby now. Most respectful guy in the world. So Keith comes over and starts teaching me how to do things. And so Keith, Kyle, and I build Cowgirls Don't Cry from that.
Wow.
And a couple like friends coming over to play guitar. But it was like the most, it's just something I was doing because I was trying to figure out if I could still do it or if I was good. And I had no knowledge on like the technical aspect of making music because before I was just thrown into sessions with people and, just singing.
Right.
So that's how I did it. And that's all because of that therapy thing.
Right. I love to hear the domino effect. There are a number of, just immediately, like in the immediate area that I think of, programs that are, for lack of better words, like therapeutic intensives, like workshops. On-site is a really good one. And the Bridge to Recovery in just outside Bowling Green in Kentucky. We've got some really good ones in the Southeast, but they're so worth it. So many people close to me, their lives have been changed like what you're talking about. Like it was the fire that lit everything, that opened the doors, broke generational curses, all the things. And so I love to hear that from you. And then also that it made it really possible for you to pursue music.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Not to sound cliche, but I would really love to know for you what has been the most cathartic part of embracing music as your all. Like you're putting your all into music. Now, you know that you sing well. You're putting really good music out with a message to create change. What do you, when you talk about what that does for you, what is it?
So when I was in LA at the interior design company, the way that the environment was very like, you want to try it? We want you to try it. So my boss had a nonprofit that he started. I ended up managing that nonprofit for him. He wanted to sponsor young people going through recovery because his nephew had passed away from a heroin overdose. So while I started at the for-profit, I ended up deeply embedded in client intake and dealing with the detox centers and the rehab centers and everything, right? Because he wanted to see someone through the entire process. And I found more joy in helping people in that way than I had felt in a long time. And I remember he had one client who was insistent upon leaving the center. He was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And his uncle was actually one of our biggest for-profit clients. And he was like, I'm done. I want to go back to using. I want to do this and that. And he had never met me before. And at the time I was just doing paperwork for the nonprofit. I wasn't involved. And I asked my boss, I said, would you be okay with me calling him and talking to him? And he's like, I don't know if it's going to do anything, but that's how Jim is. He's like, if you believe it, I believe it. So go for it. He ended up staying in recovery. And I was like, oh, I know how to, this is what I'm meant to do, is connect. So the most cathartic part of music is the same thing. It's the ability to connect with another human being and let them know, like, I see you, I know what's going on. There's a chance I've been there, because I really, before I leave the earth, want to do everything I can to reignite a sense of community in people, because we've totally fucking lost the plot. And that feels, while I love, it's fulfilling to help someone through recovery, that is really, really exhausting and I give too much of myself. I'm best utilized as a conduit for the point of it all.
Yeah.
So that's, now that my purpose is clear, my mission is clear, and I feel like it's much bigger than me, I just sort of get to relax and lean into and be fluid into what's happening rather than like, well, I have to get a CMA or else blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's not where this goes, but I know why I'm here. And all of that is because of the series of events leading up to it. Lemony Snicket's, you know?
Yeah.
All of it is the unfortunate events led to the point of it all.
You know, and I think that for so many, I mean, for myself, it's been the case, you know, so many people I talk to, that's been the same. We hit a fork in the road though. When crap happens to us, we get to choose. I feel like we always have a choice.
Yeah.
Some of us have more of a privileged choice than others, of course. But I think that we always have choices, whether we're going to let it control the rest of our life or it's going to be a tool that we use and we're going to grow out of it. And I love that you chose the latter, because you are, I mean, like your presence, your voice, your literal voice and your figurative voice are both just so impactful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when talking about, you said, I don't know where it's all going to go, but I want to be in the here and the now. So what is the here and the now right now for what your goal is in making your current music and where we're headed?
We're finishing up a project now. It's, as everyone says every time they make new music, it's the best music I've ever made. But everyone I'm around is in a symbiotic dynamic with me. And that's very hard to create in an environment like the entertainment industry because of the nature of it and the money that's possible. So right now, I'm making the best thing I've ever made and the most vulnerable thing I've ever made with the best people I've ever met. And I don't see a world where that energy doesn't translate.
I love it.
But I don't know. I mean, I'd love to pay my rent on time without stressing out, but that'll come.
Yeah. It will.
Yeah.
I believe that.
I'll get more toilets to clean. I'll make it work.
You are a go-getter for sure. And I love that.
Thank you.
Yes. So what are there any themes, or can you tell us anything about the music specifically, or does it like,
sure.
Yeah,
I'm not famous. It doesn't matter. I can tell you, I can play all the music right now. It is, I think it's all the iterations of me in one collection, because I feel like everybody always feels pressure to be one specific, like you kind of have to funnel yourself into one digestible existence. But there are so many facets to most human beings. And I think where a lot of us reach a depressive or anxious state is, well, I have to do this because this is how one person experienced me. So this is how everybody had to experience me. And it's so inauthentic. Like one day I'm a huge cunt and the next day I'm a little baby and Cody's having to like rock me to sleep and kiss my forehead. And I don't know why we're not allowed to be both in some capacity, especially as entertainers. I feel like you get stuck in a theme of like, this is who I have to be. So I wrote about being a little baby. I wrote about being a man-eating cunt. I wrote about, so can I say that?
You said it.
I wrote about my uncle's suicide last month. And how I'm choosing to look at it. Like there's everything. There's me in assless chaps and there's me in, overalls and a t-shirt catching crawdads like I did when I was little, because we all have those. Those exist in all of us. And I think we'd be much happier if we didn't feel a pressure to only be one version of ourselves all the time.
So true. Which I think the overarching theme of what you're talking about is moving into a place where we truly embrace. It's such a hot topic word right now, is authenticity. But what does it mean? What does it mean to step into authenticity? And I think you really just touched on a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because even a 9-to-5 office corporate worker, I think that we start to get known for having a specific type of personality trait, and we feel like that's the role that we play. I mean, that actually starts as a young, when we look at from a therapeutic standpoint, we all have the roles that we play in a family dynamic. You know, you've got your scapegoat, God, I can't remember they have actual, the terms for it, but they play out on into adulthood. And I think that, like you said, to your point, we get stuck, but we're only stuck because we believe the lie that that's what we are. So what happens when we let go, and
what happens when we allow people to evolve? Because we are so hell-bent on holding everyone accountable all the time. And sometimes people need to be held accountable. But wouldn't it be crazy and great if someone used to kind of be a piece of shit and then they evolved out of that, and you got to watch their evolution and learn from it and evolve yourself, rather than holding people to a standard that you yourself would fail at, that you can't uphold? And that's there's an evolution happening constantly. We have to let go, but we're we have to be this way. We have to I've been 3,000 people since I came onto this earth. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I've been so many versions of myself, and I'll continue to shift.
Well, and I think that again, this sounds so elemental, but I think that we're always either going, one of two directions. We're either regressing in our growth or we're growing. And, I mean, I always hope to be doing the latter, but I have been through a lot of stuff. This has been one of those years where I had a lot of change in my personal life this past year, and have had a couple people who've kind of reemerged in my life that have been around for a while say, you are so different than the person I knew when I met you 10 years ago. And my answer to that was, I'm glad.
Good.
Yeah. Good. But I don't think that I think that was a surprising answer. People are comfortable with consistency.
Yeah.
People get uncomfortable with change, especially when it happens in other people. And it's most uncomfortable when good change is happening in other people.
Yes.
In your life, because if it's not also happening within you, it either means that you're growing apart, or it can mean so many different things, but it shifts a lot of stuff around.
It does. It really does. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to be focused on what has happened. We're supposed to be focused on right now and how to best serve right now. And the mini scope version of how I explain this to people is how mad people get when an artist tries a different genre. Why would that make you upset? With everything going on in the world, why would Beyonce making music that she wants to make upset you this much, but genocide does not? Let's evolve.
Yeah.
Let's let Beyonce evolve. Let's all embrace the evolution. What is the deal? But we're so afraid of change. It was one of the things my dad was most afraid of growing up, which is I think why I, as an adult, am bring on the chaos, because I don't want to be the same. I don't want to be the same tomorrow that I was today. I want to learn something new and take that into tomorrow. We should all be open to that and leaning into it.
I agree.
So that we don't die off as a species, but whatever.
Well, we have a choice to make every day, I think. And I'll be honest, I think I would like to say that I'm open to it every day. There are some days where I'm no, I'm going to be the grumpy version that's barely surviving today because that's the best I can do. But most days I really try to be the version that's open to change and feedback and opportunities of growth that come my way. Yeah. But I'm going to kind of thread the needle here, if you're okay talking about it, because you lightly touched on your uncle. That was a pretty big thing that really recently happened in your life.
Yes. He was 76, and he was the last relative for my dad other than my little brother, because my dad is not my biological dad. He's my dad. But my brother and my uncle were the only people left in the bloodline. My uncle had congestive heart failure, and he had spent his childhood in an iron lung. So he told me, you know, I don't want to spend the last part of my life lying down. And I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know this was how he was going to do it. I had no heads up, but we went to see him for Christmas, and we had a great time with him. And then a few weeks later, he had fallen a couple times, and my mom was like, all right, I'm going to come over on Saturday and we're going to talk about getting some nurses in here, because I think, you know, edema starts to happen and things start to happen where with congestive heart failure, where the legs don't work as well. And he already had some complications because of being in an iron lung.
Yeah.
So I think he was so scared that he was going to be a burden to me and my mom and my brother. And he knew by that mostly me and my mom, and because my brother is a pilot, so he, you know, he wouldn't be able to be there. But my uncle knew I'd move back to Texas and take care of him. So he, you know, he had $1.25 in his savings account after he was told that if he worked his whole life and kept his head down, that the government would, you know, send him his Social Security and he'd be fine. And he told my mom before he did it, she didn't know he was going to do it, but he told her, they told me I'd be fine until 80. They told me I'd be fine. And I think he was so scared of being a burden, and the system failed him. So he took matters into his own hands, and he shot himself in his house. And my mom found him. But he's so thoughtful. He put a beanie on. He put this blanket that I bought him over him. He covered himself with pillows. He put his trumpet next to him, his address book, his cell phone, and turned all the sinks on in the house because it was when it was cold in January.
Oh my gosh.
And then did it in such a way that when my mom found him, she did not know he had killed himself. She thought he fell. She just saw one little, and then when the cops came, they said, this is a suicide. I was on the phone with her and they go, man, this was a suicide. And my mom's in her car freaking out. The way he did it was so thoughtful that she didn't even see it. And from a spiritual perspective, the way that he did it, there is no possible way that she would not have seen, because it was from the, she should have seen it without being too graphic. It was to the point where if I wanted to see him at the funeral home, I would have had to sign a mental health waiver. So it was visible. When my mom found him, she didn't see anything, just one drop of blood. And I know that was my dad, and I know that was Uncle Ross, because when something traumatic happens to a person, their soul leaves their body before it happens. So I know Ross was out of his body, and I know that they both somehow protected my mom from seeing what doesn't even make sense that she wouldn't see.
Right. It's interesting to hear you talk about, because like anytime we talk about someone ending their own life, it's obviously traumatic. It's a difficult, in theory, I think it's a difficult topic to approach, because I mean, you have so many opposing viewpoints right now on whether or not, I mean, like this is a whole rabbit hole we could go down on the, what is it called?
Medically assisted.
Right.
Yeah.
But talking about aside from how traumatic the scene was in and of itself, being able to look at it from a standpoint of being in his shoes and trying to be as thoughtful as he could with what he had to work with. Can't imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I'll play the song after we're done, but the song I wrote is not about how angry I am and how much I'm hurting, but rather, I'll see you soon. It won't be too long. And I get it. I'll see you in your great beyond. Mm-hmm. Because I just think that when suicide happens, I know why everybody's angry, and you have every right to be, but it doesn't change what is. Mm. And I've been around enough death at this point to understand that all that does is mess up the time I have to be angry at him. Mm. So why? There's nothing I can do. So I'm going to choose to accept what he chose and honor him by not making myself a victim to it. And I'm not saying that anyone's wrong for how they handle it. It's just sure. Personally, like, would I have done it any differently? I don't know. Yeah. He was a gun guy. He collected guns. So he had like 20 some odd guns at one point. Mm-hmm. He didn't use them on anybody ever, but he loved like old Cobras and stuff. Mm-hmm. So this was what he knew. So who am I to say?
What do you feel like the legacy he left behind this world and for you was?
I actually didn't know anything about my dad and his childhood. My dad really tried to act like it was Leave It to Beaver time. And when my uncle started to get sick, he started to open up about stuff we never knew as kids. Because my uncle would come over for holidays, but we had never even been to his house. He was like an enigma.
Why?
He didn't want us over. And when he got sick, I said, I'm coming the fuck over. So you let me in or I'm taking an axe to the door. It's up to you. So he let me in, and his house is completely organized and clean and everything. I thought maybe he was a hoarder, because I was like, why can't we come over, dude? Yeah. What's going on in here? And it's completely clean and adorable. So I think I learned a lot about my dad. I learned why my dad didn't want me to do music. And it's because Ross learned to play trumpet when he was lying down, because he had to be after he got out of the iron lung, he had to be in braces every summer and bedridden. So he learned to play trumpet lying down to keep his lungs working, because obviously polio goes after the lungs. Mm.
So it was to exercise, to rehabilitate his lungs, basically.
Yes. And he was so good, he actually traveled with the U.S. Orchestra right out of high school. And I have all of that. He had it hidden in some back room we never went in, but I found it all these, like, I have like every article he's ever been in. But he was incredible at music. And I think my dad associated music with his own trauma from having a sick brother, mm-hmm. and he didn't know how to separate the two. And it was like, we don't do music in this house. This is not a thing we do. Not because he's an evil man, because he didn't want me to suffer. He was like, he associated music with suffering. And so I've gotten all this clarity on my own childhood because Ross was like, here's what happened. Here's actually what happened. Here's what you didn't know. Here's everything about me I want you to know. And it was like this whole piece of my life that I always had question marks on. Yeah.
Talk about a gift.
Yeah.
Especially with this iteration or this evolution of your life that you're going through now, and what's being laid out in front of you. It's just, I think it speaks to the theme that you were talking about earlier. You're like, I don't know what all the purpose is. I just know I'm focused on what's right here underneath my feet, what's next, what we're doing. And I really relate to that so much. You and I are in different spaces when professionally and what have you, both in media, but I've had so many people ask me, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? I have never. You did. That's right. I
asked you what your goals, and you're like, yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you what my passion mm-hmm. and mission and vision are, but they're not what I want to achieve in a 5, 10, 15 year standpoint.
Right.
I have a little bit more like, what's the word? Tangible of an idea of something that I think would be a fulfilled calling for me. But I am so open to what is meant to be for me, and the understanding, mm-hmm. Resting in the understanding that what is meant is not always meant for me to know ahead of time.
Yeah.
And I think that if I had known what I'm doing today was meant for me, if I had known it 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I would have screwed it up.
Yeah.
Or lost my mind because I wasn't able to handle that.
I always say that because I got in really significant spaces quickly when I got into music because of who I was signed to.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had actually had any of those opportunities work, I would have already ruined my entire career. I was not ready. I had no purpose behind what I was doing. It would have been a flash in a pan, done. I would have had my 15 minutes and then been chasing it for the rest of my life. So I'm so glad for both of us that it didn't work out until now.
Yeah. The unfolding is just this beautiful, never-ending process. Mm-hmm. And I think that, finding the balance and resting in the what is and just continuing to seek and put one foot in front of the other is the beauty of every day of living in the creator's life. And I love that you and I both connected so much on our drive to be connectors. Mm-hmm. We do it in different ways. But human beings, we are meant to live in community. We're meant to be connected. Connection is the essence of healing. It's the opposite of sickness and suffering. And so being able to facilitate that, whether it's through someone's story, which is what I love to do, in the medium of talking or through song, or sharing a message that transforms someone's life or makes them feel less alone.
Yeah. Or making a TikTok.
Yes. We were before we hit the camera rolling button today, we were talking about how I'm a little bit behind the times on TikTok. But
as long as somebody in this room is like posting for you, then that's fine.
Yes.
You're good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the day and age we live in. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I love you so much.
I love you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And this has just really been an amazing conversation. I'm not surprised in the least bit. I want to ask you, this is my favorite question to ask because our goal in every single one of these stories that we tell from our guests is that we change at least one person's life, but I know it's going to be many. Mm-hmm. So for that individual or those people that have connected with your story, what final thought or encouragement would you like to leave with them?
I mean, I think it's just an amalgamation of what we were already talking about. I think lean into the unknown and be comfortable in the uncomfortable, and know that if something doesn't feel right in your gut, then it probably isn't. Because if I had listened to myself however many times instead of doing drugs, if I had just listened to myself, I would have skipped some of the pain, and it happens the way it's supposed to happen. But if I can save anybody else some time, if it feels misaligned, it is misaligned. Mm-hmm. And do your part with whatever, maybe you don't have the money to buy the person behind you's groceries, but when you see someone who's unhoused, acknowledge their existence when you pass them. Like, if you've got extra food, don't throw it away. See where you can take it, see what you can do. There's something that any human being can be doing. You can change somebody's life with, I can't tell you how many unhoused people are just their entire day changes because I say hi. I don't give them, nobody's asking for anything. It just happened the other day. I
love that you mentioned that because for me, we live in Nashville and there's a big community of, well, and you know what? I don't know if they're unhoused, but they're on the street corner asking for money most of the time or food. I think that for me, like I told you, I grew up in Brentwood. Like I was.
You didn't know. You don't know until you know.
You don't know until you know. So I think the big thing for me was really identifying that eye contact is one of the most dignifying things that you can do for someone when you see them.
Yeah.
And then I love what you said about the food. because I've started to think about that as well. Like when I have leftovers, instead of, because I don't eat leftovers.
Right.
I mean, that is very privileged statement that I'm making right now.
It's okay.
But what I've started to realize is that I can get a box, and the likelihood that I'm going to see someone on the side of the road between the restaurant I'm eating at and my home is about 99%. And it makes me so happy to because like I was convinced, I thought that people that were here anyway, on the street corner only wanted money.
Yeah.
And it's not about getting a good feeling, but it's a wonderful byproduct that I feel like I'm doing something, being less wasteful.
Yeah.
And doing more change. So you were talking about like just doing more.
Yeah.
Than what you're already doing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people get hung up on like, well, if I give him $5, he's going to go get drugs. Well, number one, you don't know that. And number two, don't give the money with the intention of controlling where it goes. Give the money if you have it and you can. And if you can't, do something else.
Yeah.
But a lot of unhoused people, because I worked with unhoused people for years in LA through the nonprofit, we helped a lot of people. And I work with Mark from Soft White Underbelly on trying to help some of the people he interviews get help and get rehab. A lot of what those people have been through is so traumatic, and then they're on the street, and in order to survive mentally and physically, they turn to drugs because it's incredibly traumatizing every day. And I think we need to reduce the stigma around drug use when it comes to the unhoused community.
Sure.
Because baby, you'd be doing drugs as well if you were in that situation.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Like if you had to turn tricks, you'd be doing a little
absolutely
too.
Because as a recovering addict myself, I did not get well. You know what? I will say this. I was couch hopping, and then I was back at my parents. But essentially, I was not paying for a place that I was living. So could you say that I was unhoused at one point? Sure. But I had places to go. But my point in saying this is that I can wholeheartedly relate to being in an existence where your reality is so impossible to live that you'll put anything in your body to avoid reality. I never was to the point where I had to worry about whether or not I was going to be warm on a cold night.
Yep.
Whether I was going to have water to clean myself so that I didn't stink from, or food to eat. Especially when you're an adult and life has happened, no matter what the circumstances are, to take you from a place of self-sufficiency to losing those things, it is so, so hard. So many people say, well, why don't you just get a job? Well, many, 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 many things happen, and it is very difficult to level yourself up to a place where you're employable once you hit that rock bottom point. And you hit the nail on the head when you said, of course you're not going to want to experience reality. When it's not only the feeling of being unemployable, the truth is that when you hit a certain point, you name me places that are going to hire someone that hasn't had a bath in however many weeks, holes in their clothes, whatever. There's steps that have to be taken. So you get in this cycle. What is a person to do?
And that's the thing.
And what if that was your uncle? What if that was your son? What if that was your brother?
It is. Like I go to the mission a lot, and those are people's family members. These aren't this alternate being. They're like, lesser than us humans with jobs or whatever. Like these are human beings who hit a hard time and maybe didn't have the resources, maybe didn't have the same things we have. I was doing drugs and I had a place to sleep and I had a place to I had all those things and I was still doing drugs. So it's like, when I'm talking about evolution and final words, please evolve out of the idea that we don't need each other and that others are less than, or what. The only thing that's going to save us is the sense of community. So before you look at a single mom or an unhoused person or whatever the weird stereotypes are, a person who's of a different melanin than you, before you start to decide where you exist and where they exist on the rung of who's better, please remember that it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It doesn't exist. You're not better if you vote for Trump. You're not better if you vote for Biden. It doesn't exist. And your callousness goes out into the world and just has a ripple effect. So evolve to the place where your default is empathy and kindness, but also don't take shit from people. But let's get past the weird, everybody's my enemy, finger pointing, unhoused people are dirty, they're drug addicts. Half the people I know that are drug addicts are not on the street. Mm. So what are we talking about here?
That's right.
Be nice.
You just hit like 20 really good points there. What a way to close out. Food for thought. So I hope that, gosh, I know I'm gonna be thinking about all of those after this. Lou, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been great. Mm-hmm. And to all of you that are listening or watching, I'm going to remind you, as I always do, that it's never too late to start loving yourself, and you're always only one decision away from a completely different life.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.